Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to another webinar in our Finding a Unicorn Small Wastewater System Funding series. Today's session is on federal procurement. My name is Zoe Eisel from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. Before we begin, we're going to go over a few logistics and then we can get started. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question box anytime throughout the session. We will be saving your questions for a facilitated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note, GoToWebinar has recently gone through an update, and you can now add live captions or react using emojis. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording and any other information you may need. You can also download the slides from today in the Materials tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar has not been submitted for pre-approval of continuing education credits, but eligible attendees will receive a certificate of attendance for their personal record. To receive a certificate for this session, you must attend for the entire session and register and attend individually using your real name and unique email address. Certificates will be sent via email within 30 days of the webinar date. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact smallsystems@syr.edu. Now for a little bit about us. The Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems in all U.S. states and territories through our Building Technical, Managerial, and Finance Capacity programs. If your community or utility needs assistance with drinking water or wastewater system management, please feel free to contact us through our request form, which I'll be sharing shortly in the chat. Our team is located across the country and can readily deploy staff or resources to meet your community where you are. Each of our partners brings unique experience and specialized expertise to address a wide range of community needs and expand the available services EFCN can offer. Through this network, EFCN works directly with communities and utilities to provide a wide variety of free, customized, and technical assistance services. Find only some of the ways our team can support your community listed here, and use the link in the chat to submit a request and receive tailored support based on your needs. Lastly, make sure to keep up with EFCN by scanning the QR codes provided or visiting the links I will be sharing shortly in the chat. Through these links, you can view upcoming webinars and trainings, sign up to begin receiving notifications for future events, and access the recordings of webinars you may have missed. And on that note, we can get started. I would like to introduce our presenters for today, Tamira Jones, Federal Grants Officer, and Kathleen Kirkpatrick, Manager, both from Capacity Collaborative. Welcome, Tamira and Kathleen, and I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Zoe, I will share our presentation here. As Zoe said, I'm Kathleen Kirkpatrick. We are with the Capacity Collaborative. We are part of the Environmental Finance Center Network, along with lots of other great folks providing technical assistance. This is session number 8 in a series of 12. Thanks for traveling along this path with us as we take you on this journey for federal funding assistance. Tamira is our federal grants officer based in California. I'm indeed in the Southeast, located in Montgomery, Alabama. A little quick overview for the series for those who may not be familiar. As I said, this is 12 parts, and we really designed this to travel all the way from getting project ready through project management and implementation and on through how to do things like procurement in compliance with federal requirements, which we'll be covering today. You can, as I said, go back and find some of those other sessions online or download the materials. Just a quick recap, and you'll see this in your slide deck that you can download, of all of the different segments that we've covered And next week we will be having office hours. So we'll have time today for Q&A towards the end, but this is a really dense topic. And if you come away thinking, oh, wow, I have a question about so-and-so, hope is not lost. We'll be there for you in a couple of weeks too. So go ahead and sign up for those office hours if you think you might have additional questions. With that, I am going to turn this over to Tamira. I'll be running the slides, and let's get started.
Thanks, Kathleen, and thanks, Zoe. Yeah, welcome to the 8th session of a 12-part session. We recognize that finding and managing funding for small water systems is challenging, so we're hoping to break down that process. And today's session purpose is really getting into the federal standards for acquiring goods and services with public funds. And all the elements associated with that. I'm going to spend a little time hopefully sharing some knowledge around contracting public infrastructure projects and the specific procurement standards related to that. And as always, our goal is to demystify this process. Next slide. So topics we're going to cover today, I'm going to talk about the Office of Management and Budget procurement guidelines, also called Uniform Administrative Guidelines, also called 2 CFR 200, specific to procurement. I'm going to talk about federal procurement methods based on the Code of Federal Regulations. I'm going to get a little bit into the competitive bid process. It's something most folks are going to be doing as part of their wastewater improvement projects, and then talk a little bit about contract terms for vendors and making sure you're passing on some of these specific grant requirements to your contractors. We talk about purchasing equipment with federal funding, and then we'll touch on Build America, Buy America, and then Davis-Bacon Act as it pertains to contracting for public works projects. And then my favorite topic, documentation, how to document your procurement process to make sure that you are providing your federal funding agencies the necessary proof that you've done everything correctly. And as Zoe said, we will do some Q&A. If you have burning questions, just add them to that questions tab as we go, and so we can stack them, and hopefully we can get to them in the order that they're inputted. Next slide. One of the things I saw based on some of the questions we've had in previous sessions, we just had a session on federal grant management. If you're interested, that was 2 weeks ago now, was just clarifying some of the types of federal funding and how procurement requirements pertain to them. So there's different types of federal funding. There's competitive federal grants and loans, which most of you are probably interested in or have been able to get in the past. So those are predetermined period of time and purpose. This includes SRF loans that are first come, first basis and have repayment. There's subawards, which a lot of the clients I work with have, that are awarded to an agency, usually a state, and then passed down to other entities. And then there's pass-through funding. Subawards are you're written into the grant, so you're not the lead, but you're party to all the grant terms. So you're a sub-awardee to a direct funder. So that might be your municipality or county. Pass-through is through a state agency. Typically, it could be a county as well, where there's federal funds either directly funding the program or commingled with other local government funding. And then congressionally directed spending or earmarks. Again, those are budget appropriations that go directly through a congressional earmark. We're seeing more and more of those. Federal wastewater earmarks, especially in 2026, they're diverting funds directly from the Clean Water State Revolving Funds. And now it's around $1.5 billion. So those are targeting specific local projects than the competitive grant project process. I say all this because all these things have some commonalities. They're different funding types, but they all count towards your audit threshold. They all follow federal procurement standards, which I'm going to go into. Some have a little bit different requirements, but for the most part, if you're in any of those buckets, these federal procurement standards apply. Versus those things below the line, which are contracts for goods or services. So if an organization is providing goods or services to another organization and are paid out of federal funds, those are considered fee for service, not federal grants. The entity providing those is not required to follow federal procurement. Obviously, you're following federal procurement to get those goods and services, but there aren't like flow down requirements. And then federal contractors, so vendors who are directly bidding on federal projects are qualified to be a vendor to provide services to federal agencies. Different requirements apply to vendors, which I won't be getting into, but that's federal acquisition requirements or FAR. And if folks are interested, I'm going to share some resources at the end. And also I'm happy to share resources offline if you're working with vendor contracts or you want to become a vendor with the federal government. But contracts and becoming a vendor do not follow federal procurement guidelines. Next slide. So let's get into it. So I do have 2 CFR references on some of these slides, so do download the material so you can go directly to some of those reference links. Federal procurement guidelines is governed by the Code of Federal Regulations that OMB puts out and updates every once in a while, specifically 2 CFR Part 200. And there's lots of subcodes to that. So I'm trying to distill this down now. So all federal recipients or subrecipients must have written procedures for procurement transactions that follow federal guidelines. So if you haven't received, or the entity you're working with has not received a federal grant, you may not have you might have a procurement policy for purchasing goods and services, but it might not be following federal procurement standards. So that would be the first thing I would look at. If you have one, it might be time to update it. Just make sure that everything you're doing also adheres to what the federal government requires subrecipients and recipients to do. So some basic distillation of a very long code is all procurement must be conducted in a fair and open manner. So you're really following the spirit of the federal laws. Sometimes it's not super prescriptive, it's guidance, and how you implement it is up to your agency as long as it's following the applicable federal laws. So some of those things around competitive is not placing unreasonable requirements on firms for them to qualify to do business. That can be things like requiring unnecessary experience to qualify, or excessive bonding, or imposing geographical preference on bids unless that's really necessary. It can be a geographic location can be a selection criteria now in the procurement process, but it should leave an appropriate number of qualified firms given the nature of the project. Avoid purchasing unnecessary or duplicated items. Purchase of sustainable or recovered or recyclable materials. That's going to be especially true with EPA funds. Where appropriate, you will conduct an analysis of lease and purchase alternatives to see which one's most economical. So you don't always need to purchase equipment, you can lease or rent. Obviously, you're going to need to maintain oversight over contractors or subrecipients to ensure that they're performing in accordance to the terms of their contracts or purchase orders. That should be embedded into your procurement policy. Whenever possible, efforts should be made to purchase American-made products. And sometimes when required by grant terms, you have to solely procure products produced in the U.S. under BABA. Whenever possible, the purchase of goods and services should be selected from different sources and not a single source provider. So you want to make an effort to solicit from a variety of sources, not just keep going to the same vendor over and over for goods or services. Again, you're adhering to creating a competitive market for you're spending public funds, so they don't want to see that those funds are benefiting one provider. Obviously, you want to use the type of procuring method determined by the type and cost of the goods or services, which I'm going to get into in the next slide. Contracts should be made with responsible contractors. I know that sounds a little vague, and the CFR language is consideration shall be given to such matters as contract integrity, record of past performance, financial and technical resources, or accessibility to necessary resources. So I'll talk about the bid process more, but you want to make sure that in your selection process, you are able to measure contractors' past performance. Do they have the capacity to deliver on the goods or services, invoice on time? Do they have back office? Are they able to document prevailing wage? All these things should be taken in consideration when using public funds to contract. And then all contract or all procurement instruments, so the whole procurement process should be documented. So we'll get into the documentation. That means retaining any bid proposals, RFPs, solicitations for the life of the grant and made available on request for up to 3 years following the close of grant. I just want to note too that with the updates to OMB in 2024, states and Indian tribes can now use their own procurement policy when conducting procurement transactions under a federal award. So states and tribes should follow the same policies and procedure it uses for procurement with non-federal funds. Obviously, if they're contracting or subawarding with another entity that's not a state or tribe, then they must follow 2 CFR. Next slide. Get into procurement methods. This also comes out of 2 CFR. So these are the current thresholds for the types of procurement and the process that you're going to follow. Micro purchases are now up to $10,000 per unit cost. So if the aggregate dollar amount does not exceed the micro purchase threshold of $10,000, you don't have to put out a bid or anything like that. You can award without soliciting competitive quotes. If you consider that the price is reasonable based on past experience or research or other information, as long as you just maintain some documents to support that. You still want to distribute equally among suppliers. You don't want to keep purchasing the same, 10,000 here, 10,000 here, 10,000, and then you pretty much are exceeding the threshold if you just keep making micro purchases to the same vendor. I had someone recently ask me, is that like counts for equipment? And the reason is like some vendors make a pump or something, and that's the only one who makes that pump. As long as you can justify why you're going to a particular qualified supplier, that should be fine. You generally are going with the lowest cost. You do want to make consideration for disadvantaged business entities and making sure you're distributing your purchasing to lots of different qualified vendors and selection of DBEs over other non-DBE vendors. I'll talk a little bit more about disadvantaged business entities too, if folks have questions about that. The second threshold for procurement is simplified acquisition, which is now to $250,000. It was $150,000, so this got easier. This is a simple and informal procurement method for securing services, supplies, and other property that don't cost more than $250,000. You still need to get price or rate quotations from an adequate number of qualified sources. That's typically inferred as 3 or more. 2 CFR doesn't specify. Again, DBA considerations should be made. You can purchase the more expensive option if it offers the better value. So quality is a consideration in simplified acquisitions. And then formal acquisitions are above $250,000. Obviously, that's going to include like construction and maybe even engineering. And there's different formal competitive invitations for local governments. Typically, you're going to do a sealed bid. That's a firm fixed price contract, which could be a lump sum or unit price. It's awarded to the reasonable bidder who, conforming to all the Terms and conditions of the invitation for the bid is the lowest priced. This is the preferred method for construction. And then competitive proposals, which is probably more commonly done, is in both situations you want to know you have a significant, an adequate number of bidders. So definitely with competitive proposals, what you're doing is you're comparing bids. So you're normally conducting this when there's one or more source of submitting an offer. There could be a fixed price or cost reimbursement type of contract, because generally this is used when conditions are not appropriate for a sealed bid, like it's not a super specific technical goods or service. There might be some specialized services like design or unknown engineering elements or some creative materials that allows for a range of price. So there's more flexibility in a competitive proposal process. Next slide, I'm going to get into the bid process because sometimes this is kind of confusing for folks if they haven't done it before, if they're new to the process on their team. So sealed bids, it's like I said, this methods appropriately if there's at least 2 responsible bidders, the requirements are super clear, and the selection is based on price. So you'd use it when you know you can get at least 2 to 3 bidders on something. There isn't a significant technical or engineering unknowns. Maybe it's getting from 50% to 100% engineering. You're going to award it to the lowest responsible bid. So this, again, could be like purchasing bulk supplies or equipment, get very specific procurement. You do want to continue to use full and open competition, utilizing disadvantaged businesses. So you want to post it for at least 30 days. You can't create unreasonable requirements. So like examples would be unnecessary bonding or use of brand names, or like I said before, geographic location. It can be a selection criteria, but you do need to leave an appropriate number of qualified bids. Again, select from different sources and not a single source provider. As always, you want to avoid conflict of interest in the process. So something I've seen in the past are grantees or loan recipients are utilizing contractors to draft specifications or statements of work, or even the bid invitation, which means that they are excluded from bidding. That is a conflict of interest. Ensure that no one may benefit from the bid is part of the selection process, very key. And then for local governments, the bids must be open publicly. Next slide. So competitive bid process. This is when you know when the bidder's qualification or technical approach might be more important than the price consideration. So again, like design or engineering contracts where cost variables applies based on their proposal. So you have up to $500,000. You're going to get bids from probably like 400,000 to $1 million. You're going to get quite a range because folks are going to put everything in the ring, so you have a lot of cost flexibility, but you still have a budget, right? You still want to pick a qualified bidder that is within the funding range that you have. Typically, contracts are going to be reimbursable or possibly fixed price. It's an objective process. You're going to take everything into consideration to award to the most qualified bidder. You're going to document your criterion selection rationale. Should be an objective process. You should have a really clear criteria for selection. For sole source, that's only when one source can provide the goods or services. That you can't justify using sole source by not making an effort to advertise. You still should advertise. It's really like you advertise and you only got one, right? You made an effort. Sole source contracting can also happen in an emergency where you don't have time to post for 30 days. Pipe broke and you need to get a contractor out ASAP. You should go get pre-approval from the funding agency for sole source. And pre-approval especially if it's over 250,000. So you must seek pre-approval from the federal funder for anything over a simplified acquisition where only one bidder was solicited. So maybe you put something out for sealed bid and you only got one. So inadvertently, it becomes a sole source contracting. When the lowest bidder is not selected and you have a good reason for it, it's good to seek pre-approval. If you use the brand name, when you use it in the bid solicitation because you need it as a very specific item, you should get pre-approval. Always get pre-approval if the procurement contract is modified and exceeds the simplified acquisition threshold. So I see this sometimes too, where you contract for 250,000 or 240,000. So you're under that simplified acquisition, and then you amend the contract, or it goes over and it takes longer, and then it becomes a $300,000 contract. You now moved into a different procurement threshold, so you should get pre-approval for that. Next slide. I want to talk about preparing a request for proposals. So when you're putting out an RFP for goods and services, I kind of have like a best practice for putting those together. So obviously you're going to want a clear and accurate description of the technical requirements for any material, products, or services. Again, you don't want to make it so specific and restrictive that no one can perform the work or provide the goods. So that's why 2 CFR does have some caveats around using brand name or equal language. Yeah, you don't want to be unduly restrictive. This is also where you can put in federal guidelines or even your procurement policy of having products that conserve natural resources or energy efficient, hopefully not energy deficient, energy efficient, made out of recycled materials, are recyclables. If that you have these preferences in the RFP, then that's where you should put it. Be as transparent as appropriate on all the factors that are going to be used in evaluating bids or proposals. You don't have to publish your bid review criteria, but as much as you can share about what qualifications or requirements you're seeking, put it in the RFP. Obviously, if place of performance is important or necessary, typically there's an assumption a bidder can do the work, but it's important to state that if the services are place-based, that they can locate to do the work. You don't want to disqualify non-local contractors, but again, it's still a factor in your evaluation. So if you're getting contracts for out-of-state contractors, you're evaluating, can they mobilize to undertake the project? Schedule of performance and completion, so important that the work get completed during the grant performance period or loan, and that it's invoiced before the end of the grant or loan. So no one wants to get an invoice 6 months after the grant's closed. Capacity and past performance to do the work. They need to be able to adhere to any contract clauses such as prevailing wage, be able to invoice regularly, provide progress reports in a timely manner. So past performance, you're going to ask like for them to reference equal or greater scale projects. Make sure that you know your what they're submitting as part of their solicitation or bid is reflects the complexity of the project. So how much you emphasize relative importance to past performance depends on the project, but you do want to get some references. Utilization of DBEs, small business, minority-owned firms, and women's business enterprises. Make sure they're aware of the contracting opportunity to the fullest extent possible. So you can work with your local small business alliance or administration and the Minority Business Development Agency at the Department of Conference to advertise this, to make sure you're getting bidder lists. You can also require, as part of the contracting, if the prime contractor awards subcontracts, they use DBEs or at least take the same steps that you have to advertise. Obviously, there isn't like a mandate of how long you post requests for proposals, but a minimum of 30 days before the big closing period. So smaller entities can put together a qualifying bid. Obviously, you want to see the cost justifications in a bid that clearly state the rationale for their budget. What are their rates? What are their overhead? That should be really clear in the proposal they're providing. And then you should include in your RFP any contract clauses that you know based on the funding in the project. So if it's BABA or prevailing wage, then you're being transparent. Those are going to be part of the contracting process that the contractor is going to have to adhere to. And then submission instructions, how, when, where to submit their bid, when it will be selected, when the project will start. Really important. So that's the RFP. Just some general guidelines. Never ask for information that won't be evaluated. Just for your own sanity, you don't want voluminous information that's going to reduce competition and make the whole process take longer. You don't want folks to not respond because of the amount of work it takes to put a bid together. So again, just ask for what you need to be able to evaluate bids. Next slide, please. A little bit of contracting guidance too. Again, I put another 2 CFR appendix, part 200 there. So contract provisions for non-federal entities. Do check that out after this session when you can download. But basically, the contracting process should support your procurement process or policy. So there's different types of contracts for federal awards. There's fixed price contracts, so using when there's effective competition. There's really clear product design, description, and plans and specifications. There shouldn't be any significant technical or engineering unknowns. The contractor that's providing goods or service under a fixed price is assuming the risk, so they know there's a cap on that contract, and profit is not a motivator for going over contract. It's not typically, incentivizing in that way. Versus a cost reimbursement contract, so that's used when it's not feasible to do a fixed price contract, given that the contractors might have like a ceiling that may not be exceeded but requires completion of the work. The risk to the contractors is increased, but it's not as hard as the fixed price. So there might be some leeway, like their cost and profit might be negotiated separately. But the important thing is that they're completing the amount of work equivalent to the estimated cost. Time and materials contracts. It's basically when the contract price is the sum of the cost of materials plus fixed labor hours that are loaded. They have wages, overhead, and profit built into their rates. There's less incentive to control costs, but they're used in circumstances where there's no other contracting instrument available. I would always recommend there be a cap on the amount of the contract so that the contractor exceeds it at their own risk. And then cost plus contracts, which is it's the actual costs of the goods or services plus a percentage of profit. So it does provide an incentive for the contractor to increase costs in order to increase profit. These are type of contracts are prohibited under 2 CFR. So if you see something like that, or you see a budget that's structured that way, that basically disqualifies that bidder. A couple caveats around contracting. Oftentimes the case is you start a project before the grant award or loan is awarded. So you already have maybe a contractor in place. It could be your bookkeeper, it could be a grant manager, it could be someone doing subcontracting for you. If a long-term contract precedes especially with EPA, the assistance agreement, you can use that contract if it was procured competitively, consistent with federal financial assistance regulations. So as long as you followed your procurement process, which should align with the federal procurement process, it's okay to use a contractor you've already under contract with for a new federal grant. It happens all the time, just so folks know. I did want a little extra time to talk about sole source. There's this misconception that you can award a contract because you've been working with the same contractor forever, or there's only one contractor in your area who can do a job. But a sole source contract in excess of the micro purchase threshold should be a rare scenario. And I recommend you always consult the agency before making sole source procurements. It's just, yeah, I think it's used more frequently than really is allowable. But like I said, pre-approval. Also, sometimes people will write a contractor into their proposal, and you're not required to identify contractors and proposals. And the fact that a recipient is named as a contractor in a proposal as something other than a contract, like a partner, doesn't justify a sole source contract. If it looks like a contract for goods and services, it's treated as a contract for goods and services, versus like a sub-award, which is a partner entity in the grant, which is party to all the federal grant requirements. There's a lot of flow down provisions related to federal contracting. So for contracts and sub-awards that flow down from the main recipient to the either subcontractor or subrecipient. You will see this in grant terms and conditions as requirements that adhere to subs. So one is termination for clause or convenience for any contract over $10,000. According to 41 CFR, you must include equal opportunity clause that subs are adhering to in their business practices. I've definitely seen whistleblower policies and protections required for federal subawards. So the subrecipient of a federal grant or contract must inform their employees in writing of their rights to report fraud, waste, abuse, and protection from retaliation. Obviously, you're going to flow down labor requirements, like all prime contracts in excess of $2,000 must comply with Davis-Bacon Act, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then environmental regulations. Obviously, Build American, Buy American, American Steel, iron and steel requirements, if that also falls within your contract terms. Environmental regulations. So since we're talking about wastewater systems, contracts and sub-grants in amounts of excess of $150,000 must contain provisions that require subs agree to comply with Clean Air Act, Federal Water Pollution Control Act. There may be others that get passed along in your specific award or loan terms. Always required is to check disbarment. You're going to log into sam.gov to ensure before you contract with somebody, whether an individual or a firm, that they're not listed on the disbarment list with the federal government, which prevents them from doing business with federal funds. Anti-lobbying, so contractor sub-award clause, that includes the use of federal funds. It excludes that anyone receiving federal funds pay any person or organization influencing an employee or a member of Congress who might be connected to obtaining a federal contractor grant. And then, of course, bonding requirements, if that's part of a contract agreement, amounts and terms. Next slide. Quickly, I want to just address equipment procurement. Equipment is defined as tangible, non-expendable personal property with a useful life greater than 1 year, or a per unit cost greater than $10,000. So your organization may define equipment differently, but as long as it can be less than 10,000, but as long as it can be greater than 10,000, because that's the federal requirement that you treat equipment as differently than, say, like supplies. So for equipment purchased with federal funds, You must have some written procedures around the property management and maintaining records, tracking like what I have here. Description, acquisition date, cost. Even if you're only purchasing with a portion of federal funds, you need to put the cost and the percentage of the federal funds used for that. What was the source of funding, i.e. grant? What's the serial number, title holder, where's the equipment located? What is the status of the equipment? So like what's its use, condition, and disposition. And the reason is because usually at the end of the award with federal funds that were used for purchasing equipment, there's going to be a disposition agreement that either the equipment gets returned to the federal agency or it gets disposed to another entity to use on a federal grant, or it gets disposed back to the organization, which is normally what happens. But you do have to do a federal equipment inventory at the end as part of your closeout. Next slide. Public infrastructure projects. So I did go over this a little bit in the federal management session, in the last session, but I want to get a little bit deeper because BABA, if you haven't had a BABA contracting process, you're in for a ride. So Build America, Buy America, that came out of the 2021 infrastructure investment job. So it's pretty new, but it requires that all iron, steel, manufactured products, construction materials used in federally funded projects be produced in the U.S. That applies to like over 70 EPA programs, including the state revolving funds and various community grants for water and wastewater systems. I've put the covered materials. I think sometimes people confuse AIS and BABA, but BABA's more materials than iron and steel, including non-ferrous metals, plastic, polymer products, so PVC pipes, glass, lumber, engineered wood, drywall. So it's a lot. And if the project can't meet these requirements, they may request a waiver, especially if you have projects that initiated design planning pre-May 2022 when this went into place. You might be eligible for a request for a waiver. So if you can't find US made products, they're not available, they're not of good quality, or the costs increase of purchasing BABA is more than 25% of the total project cost, then you can apply for a waiver through the awarding agency. American iron and steel provisions requires EPA and USDA rule utility service funded projects to use iron and steel products produced in the US for construction or maintenance or repair of public water systems or treatment works. So produced in the US means that all the manufacturing processes, including melting and pouring, occur in the US. Again, applies to Clean Water State Revolving Fund, drinking water SRF, community project funding. I didn't list the covered products, but it's like lined or unlined pipes, fittings, manhole covers, hydrants, pipe clamps, valves, any structural steel or precast concrete. So AIS, the same waivers apply as BABA. So if it increases costs by more than 25%, if you can't find US made products or poor quality, you can apply for a waiver. And then Davis-Bacon and related acts, DBRA. Contractors must be required to pay wages to laborers and mechanics at a rate not less than the prevailing wage, which is specified based where you live, really. It's determined by the Secretary of Labor, but you can look up what prevailing wage is in your county or district. So either the direct recipient or your contractor, if you're contracting out for this infrastructure project, they're required to pay wages not less than prevailing wage and once a week, and they have to certify payroll. As the grantee or the loan recipient, you are needing to monitor this. So it should be a condition of a contract, obviously, or a subcontract, and you must report when it's not here too. So you need to be checking, like ask for payroll certification, and you're expected to report suspected or proven violations to the federal awarding agency. I think labor is probably the #1 grant compliance issue that comes up. And then, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you're documenting you're doing all this on the next slide. So as part of your procurement process, you are creating quite a paper trail that you are doing all these things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you're doing that. So for a cost analysis, which is something you have to do for putting any budget together or purchasing equipment or supplies, you're going to save anything that's the basis for your budget and estimates. So that's for direct purchases and contracting. So quotes, those can be online manufacturer pricing, getting specific quotes, asking vendors to provide quote for, whatever, certain pump or pipe or whatever it is. Any like desktop market research you do, like looking at 2 different sites that do supplies. Keep a folder, drop that stuff in, keep that cost analysis for the life of the grant and up to 3 years afterwards. Also, document how the rationale for the procurement method you're using, whether it's sealed bids or a competitive bid process, and then all the subsequent stuff. So the request for proposal, the public announcement, any submitted proposals or bids, what your criteria for selection or rejection was. This is all public information. You don't have to provide contractors with all of this. Some of it is proprietary. You're not going to provide a contractor with other contractors' bids. You would provide the funder. And if they wanted to get it from the funder, they can do the FOIA for it. But you're going to want to keep your bidders list, recording all the entities that bid or quoted, who you sent it to, obviously names, addresses, dates of quotes, your efforts to get DBE bids, and then documenting any labor requirements. So you're going to maintain documentation that demonstrates compliance with hour and wage requirements. So you're going to be monitoring your contractors and subcontractors for compliance and keeping a record of that. Also, whether your subs have been utilizing disadvantaged business entities. So yeah, outreach, subcontractor commitments, payments to certified firms. Recently, EPA is not asking for DBA or minority business certifications. We used to have to do that annually to just certify that we have trying to utilize or have utilized DBAs. That's just recently been lifted as a reporting, but it's still expected that you utilize DBAs when possible. Obviously, you're going to want to retain contracts and all the contract terms, progress on deliverables, cost basis of invoices, making sure contractors' invoices are super clear. They're stating their rates, they're stating their hours, they're stating materials. You're going to save any verification that contractors are not disbarred, so your sam.gov search. Obviously, you're going to document any conflict of interest. So if there is a reported conflict, how it was mitigated, what was the conflict. BABA and AIS certification. So in order to prove that you've utilized Build America, Buy America, or AIS, you're going to get a certification letter. Must come from the manufacturer, not the product supplier. It must list the name and location of the product, a description of the product that's being delivered, name where the product was manufactured, must specify reference to BABA or AIS requirements, and it should be signed by the company represented and printed on their company letterhead. So this isn't something you're creating, it's coming from the manufacturer. That's for both BABA and AIS certification. Okay, so hopefully I haven't overwhelmed folks with a little dip in the ocean of procurement, but as always, we want to provide some technical assistance on procurement as well as award management overall. So these are links. So again, download the slides, but US EPA's Water and Technical Assistance TA program is really helpful for looking at procurement specifically, procurement requirements, and being able to meet them. There's a lot of tools trainings for small systems providers out there. And of course, their wonderful hosts, the Environmental Finance Center Network, and all their partners throughout the country. So do fill out a request for assistance if you have questions about procurement. There's a lot of great previous webinars on their website if you want to just look up a specific element of procurement that maybe is still mystifying. And then sign up for office hours. Zoe's going to put the link on Tuesday, March 24th, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. In your registration, if you could please put your questions, if you have a specific questions, then we can be able to address them as best we can. I am not an expert on everything procurement. I have lived and learned by doing things maybe a little less than clean and creating procurement policies for new entities that want to be able to accurately, correctly manage these kinds of grants. So lots of lessons learned. But yeah, bring your questions. And there are a lot of resources if folks have questions with working with private companies they want to be able to contract with. Again, this was focused on small water system users and managers who are going after federal funding. But if you are working with local contractors that you want to make sure they're eligible for doing business with you or being able to compete for competitive grants, there's resources I can share offline that are specific about FAR. So like acquisition.gov, Apex, there's these other TA providers out there that can help contractors be eligible. And then if you have a sticky procurement question or preparing an RFP, want some consulting, there are firms out there who do procurement consulting. I didn't want to put non-pro bono TA up here, but if you have questions about working with a private firm on putting your procurement policy together or an RFP, I'm happy to share those too. So I'll come prepared for the office hours with some more recommendations. And as always, you're welcome to reach out to us if you still have some burning questions. We're happy to address those offline. Here's our contact. Again, I'm Tamira, with Federal Grants Officer with the Capacity Collaborative, and Kathleen, who is our MC for this series. So do reach out to us if you have questions, and thank you. So we do have some time if folks had questions that we can try and get to today.
Yes. So our first question is, are there good resources for seeing high quality examples of grant documents at different stages of the process?
Well, I'm not sure if you mean grant documents or requests for proposals. Some federal agencies do post their awarded projects. So like SRF, you can actually go look at the SRF recipients and prioritization lists. So even those that haven't been funded, and you can get a really good sense of the project, the scope, the size, the cost. For bid documents, I don't think so. They're usually pretty proprietary. I can't think of any source for reviewing them, but probably EFCN or another TA provider could give you an example.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I answered.
Our next question is, for pre-existing contracts, how can a new project be awarded to a contractor if that new project was not part of the originally publicized invitation to bid?
Yeah, you would have to put that out to bid if it's a new scope of work. I'm talking about like relatively small contracts that you have in place already, not for construction, obviously, but projects that are already underway and you get funding, you get some federal funding, can continue it. If you can demonstrate that the work that's like actively underway was procured using federal standards, then you can get pre-approval for that contract to be part of your budget. But if it's like a totally new scope of work or another phase of work, you should put it out to bid. I see this come up when folks are like, well, we have an engineer that did 50% design. Like, can't we just use them for the next 50% of completion? And engineering, that's a hard one. You don't want to like start over with a new engineering firm. So yeah, talk to your federal agency to justify whether you can continue a contract or put it out to bid or sole source it.
Got it. Our next question is, can you explain procurement flexibility with EPA funding? What if a contract was procured 5 years ago?
That might be referring where I said there's cost flexibility. So sometimes you estimate in your budget the cost of a subcontract or the cost of materials, but you're not required to spend that amount of money. So you get some bids, you decide to go with the lowest, and you can either rebudget that funds or hold on to it to see if that contract might exceed. It's up to you whether you're going to agree to exceed an existing contract, but sometimes you get midway through a contract and you realize there's going to be overages or you want this contractor to do something in addition. You can amend the contract as long as you have budget. So that's what I meant. Can you repeat the question again? That's what I meant about cost flexibility. Oh, that there'd be a contract that's in place for 5 years.
Yeah, the original question was, can you explain procurement flexibility with EPA funding? What if a contract was procured 5 years ago?
Right. So what I think maybe you're referring to is like when you go over a threshold. If you've been on the same contract with someone for 5 years and you want to continue it for like another phase, again, that might be considered sole source because it's already underway and what you're getting funding for is continuing the contract or extending the contract. It's almost like a new contract really at that point. So you should talk to your federal agency whether you can use that contractor. If that contractor is doing a significant portion of the work, they may actually be a sub-awardee, and that's like their party. Their qualifications and the work that they're doing are also part of your qualification and your proposal selection. EPA sees them as a sub-awardee or sub-recipient, different than a contractor. If you're in a contract and you're getting funding for another phase that exceeds the threshold that contract was, maybe it was a contract for $200,000 and you are now bumping it up to $500,000, you do need to adhere to the new procurement method or be able to justify to the funder why you utilized the procurement method you did. But typically they don't want to see that. They don't want to see you exceeding a threshold because you extended a contract or renewed a contract.
All right, we'll try to squeeze one last question in,
Okay.
which is, what are the red flags that would make you say, I'm not sure this system has the capacity to go through the federal procurement process without making major errors?
That there is an administrative capacity to adhere to some of the contract clauses or the procurement process or overseeing and monitoring subs, not being able to like certify payroll, invoice on time, all these things, because these grants just require a lot more administrative work. Obviously, if it's a contract, like if you're contracting someone and they've never done something scope or size, that would be a red flag. Or if you're referring to your like own internal capacity, that the procurement process could be something that you write into your grant as something you contract out. And like having a like outside firm assist with this part of the project would be a good idea. So your own internal accounting department doesn't have to, but selecting a firm that is well versed in federal guidelines. And I'm happy to make some recommendations if that's okay. I don't know EFCN might also have a list of firms that do that kind of federal procurement management on your behalf. Great questions.
Huge thank you to Tamira and Kathleen for sharing their expertise with us today. Following this webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with the slides from today and a link to the recording. We also ask that you complete the webinar evaluation following the webinar, so you can let us know your thoughts on today's session, as this helps us plan future webinars on topics important to you. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at future EFCN events. Have a great day.